Hello you guys, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. This is part 2 of my story of getting bunion and hammertoe surgery. I am still in recovery currently, but I'm kind of running down all of the details of my surgeries and all the things. So please go watch part 1 so that you can get filled in. Then come back and watch part 2. All right, so picking up where we left off. I started my surgeries on my right foot because I assumed that by the time my son went back to school, early January, I will be able to take him back and forth to school. I will be somewhat healed because by all accounts, my surgeon and all the people that worked in the podiatrist office that I went to, they all said, this is a routine surgery. People get it all the time. It's really not that bad of a healing process. You're going to be up and walking in no time. They made it seem as though it was not a big deal. That was not my experience at all because, like I said, I did have a very severe case of both hammertoes and bunions. My son literally missed the entire month of January for school because I just couldn't get him there. Not only could I not drive, but I was in a surgical boot. It was hard for me to walk. I live in Chicago, so winters in Chicago are horrible. I did not want to risk run the risk of falling down, hurting myself even more. It was a mess. That was a really tough recovery. In January, after I got the hammertoe surgery, I couldn't see my foot until I was about a week post-op. So every time I would get a surgery, I would go in 5 days after my surgery, and then that would be my first post-op appointment just to make sure that my bandages were still dry and that I wasn't having any excess bleeding or excess swelling or anything like that. My very first time seeing my feet after my hammertoe surgery, I was like, yikes. The pins being in my toes was so interesting because I didn't know that that was even going to be there. I had no mobility in my feet, in the front of my feet at all. I could not feel the front of my foot at all because it was numb. I had all of the hardware in there. I had the pins in my toes, but I also had screws in my bone, in the bunion area. And I forgot, I had 2 bunions on each foot. So the regular one on the side near the big toe, and then I also had something called a Taylor's bunion, which is the bunion by the small toe, the little toe. So that was another reason why my surgeries took so long. I had to get bunions removed on both sides of my feet, so there was just no way that he was going to be able to do all that surgery at one time within a 3-hour span. So my first surgery took 2.5 hours for my bunion surgery, and then the second surgery, the hammertoe surgery, also took 2.5 to 3 hours because my second toe, right off of my big toe, it was much longer than it's supposed to be. So he had to actually shave the bone down, cut that down, and all the joints were removed from my toes. It was a lot of work. I mean, my surgeon earned every dollar. Seriously. After I had all of these surgeries, I was not planning on doing my left foot. I wanted my right foot to heal a bit so that I could get out of the surgical boot, start to acclimate myself back into regular shoes, get my son back in school. I was heavily medicated at the time because I was on anti-inflammatory medication to make sure that I was keeping my swelling down, as well as pain medication that I would take whenever I needed to. In February, early February, I got laid off from my job. I was let go in the middle of having reconstructive foot surgery. I was so upset, but I fought to keep my insurance, and I was able to keep my insurance for an additional 90 days past my last day of work in February. So with that, I was like, well, I wasn't planning on getting my left foot done, but while I have insurance, let me go ahead and get it done. So I literally went right from having my bunion and hammertoe surgery on my right foot to getting started on my left foot. My bunion surgery took place at the end of February 2026. So I was still in a surgical boot and on my right foot, and they transitioned me into a walking shoe. So that way I couldn't be in 2 walking boots. I had to be in a walking shoe and a walking boot. So then I transitioned to being in a walking boot on my left foot and a walking shoe on my right foot. Showering was so crazy. I had to buy these covers off of Amazon because my bandages could not get wet. So I had 2 covers over my walking shoe and then my walking boot. I had to be very careful so that I wouldn't slip and fall. Y'all, it was crazy. I will definitely make sure to link all of the different products that I used during this time frame so that you guys can check them out if you're also on this journey. But I had to have a pillow to make sure that I was elevating my feet every night. I had ice packs so that I could do ice therapy when I was in pain and I didn't want to necessarily keep taking pain medications. Man, I did everything I could to just make sure that I could get through the day. And then shortly after I got my bunion surgery on my left foot, I had my hammertoe surgery. So I got my pins removed from my right foot so that I can start really getting the healing process going on my right foot. And then I had the pins in my left foot. Y'all, crazy process. But I needed to make sure I got all of this done while I had insurance. So it was kind of rushed. It was not my initial plan to get both feet done so close together. I wanted to wait at least 6 months between the first foot and the second foot so that I could have a good foot to walk on. But that is not how life panned out, and I ended up getting all of these surgeries at the same time. I ended up being in a walking boot on my left foot for a little bit longer than I was on my right foot because my surgeon informed me that my bones were a lot more brittle on my right foot, so it healed much slower. And my nerves, I was having so many nerve issues on my left foot because they were so sensitive. More specifically, like right underneath my toes, right here. And then the two toes here in the middle. That pain was like no other. So it took me a much longer time to transition back into a regular shoe on my left foot than it did on my right foot. My insurance was ending at the end of May. So my very last surgery was April 2026, and that surgery was removing all of the hardware that was still inside of my bones. So I didn't have the pins in my toes anymore, but I did have screws on both sides of my feet. Remember, I had 2 different bunions on each foot. So they had to remove the hardware from each side. There were screws holding the bones together so that they could, align correctly and heal that way. And then they did that on both feet. And at some point, your body will start rejecting the hardware that's in there. And that did start happening on my right foot. I could literally I could start feeling the screw in my bunion area where it started, like my skin started to kind of push it to the surface. So it was ready to come out. So they removed those on April 30th. And then for that last month, I had physical therapy. I was going to physical therapy sometimes once a week and sometimes twice a week. So I did start driving, I would say mid-February. So by the time I started having surgery on my left foot, I was able to drive and get back into the swing of things. I'm gonna end it here. I'll definitely do a part 3 because I want to show you guys where I am now and talk a little bit more about where I am now, my recovery, being a few months out of my surgeries and more into the healing process. So the part 3 will be all about healing and what it's been like post-op. So I'll see you guys in part 3.